this kind of follows on from what the talk we had this morning around clinical evidence needs. And we're looking at the kind of needs that clinical evidence for CE marking, but also I think that this kind of, even if it's exempt from CE marking, what clinical evidence needs does it need? The current directive has an exemption for health institutions. It's written specifically into the IVD directive that says basically if you're a health institution and you're making and using your own diagnostic device, then you can ignore the regulations. We have assumed that that cuts across to medical devices as well. So if you're making your own, I don't know, app or hip implant and using it on your own patients in your own trust, you could ignore the regulations. That's what we've assumed. Looking across at other jurisdictions, at US, at Australia, Health Canada, they've all introduced requirements for laboratory developed tests. So IVDs, I guess, mostly laboratory developed tests. And what requirements would you have? When the regulations were when the new IVD regulations were being negotiated, the Commission went out for consultation, and the responses to that consultation were quite a lot of people, particularly in the UK and Ireland, wanted to keep the exemption, and we fought very hard to keep the exemption. Almost to, if you looked at the number of responses on the IVD regulations, it was from the genomics community saying, please keep the health institution exemption. So this is exactly where we're at. It's the people here who wanted to keep the exemption, and this is what it now looks like after it's been negotiated. I'm doing this. This is a practice session for me. This slide set is one I want to use again. I want other people to use again. So bear with me and give me the feedback on how good or how bad it actually is. So this is the apple pie statement. If you're making, this is in the new regulations. So if it's a medical device, it's from 2020. If it's an IVD, it's from 2022. If you wish to start using it now, you can. We're not going to stop you. But you don't have to use it until 2020 or 2022. So you can be exempt from some of the provisions, provided you meet all of the GSPR, the General Safety and Performance Requirements. You have to have a quality management system in place, an appropriate quality management system. There needs to be a justification for applying the exemption, and you need to have some technical documentation in place. And some of that information will need to be publicly available. So I'm going to talk through some of those. So what I want to do is talk about, if you're a health institution, can you apply the exemption? How do you apply it? And then I'm going to talk a little bit around governance and surveillance inspection. So how is it enforced? So I want to talk about, am I a health institution? So what is a health institution? What is manufacturing and modifying and using? And one of the kind of basic tenets of the regulations is you can't have a health institution manufactured product that is then transferred to a different legal entity. That doesn't make sense, exactly what Sarah was saying just now. But that's not quite true, so we need to have a think about that. So, according to the regulations, according to Article 5.5 of the 2017-746 EU regulations, a health institution is an organisation, the primary purpose of which is the care or treatment of patients or the promotion of public health. So, you tell me, hospital, health institution or not?
Yeah. Depends if its primary purpose is to make a profit.
Well, that's not what it says in the definition. I hear what you're saying, Ian, but that's not what it says in the definition. And and the same comment for this. But what about laboratory? Yes? No? In the regulations? Yes. What about a public health institute? God, you're good at this. What about a gym? But it's treating people, it's promoting public health. Morris is right, Morris gets the point. And spa, again, right. What about a wellness or a fitness centre? 100% so far. Right, now the difficult ones. An NHS trust, the health board, an NHS board. Yes? I'm not giving you the answers because I don't know the answers. Sorry. These are the questions. What about a collaboration? Collaboration of different organisations led by an NHS trust. So it could be an academic health hospital collaboration. It could be an industry hospital collaboration. It's led by the health institution.
Could be.
Even if it's, even to take Ian's point, even if it's for commercial gain.
It's led by the NHS. I'd say the NHS is meant to embody health and well-being.
So by definition, because it's NHS, because it's a health institution, it can lead to collaboration, and you can use the exemption. And somebody who's providing a commercial service to the NHS, so it could be a standalone organisation who is doing work on behalf of the NHS.
No.
That's quite an emphatic no.
Well, it would undermine the whole concept of CE, wouldn't it? Undermines the whole concept.
Well, this is the point. This is exactly the discussion.
Surely their primary purpose wouldn't be the care of the patients. It would be making money from providing the service.
I don't disagree with you. I think we might extend this conversation when we talk about subcontracting, especially somebody say if Ian wants a genetic probe made up, does that manufacturer of the genetic probe have to CE mark their product? There is a very big issue about single legal entity, yes.
May depend on the contracting, the differences between trust and board.
So it comes down to the contract. Okay.
Yeah.
What about one trust selling to another trust? Because we see that quite a lot.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't disagree. I think that does happen. But do you think you can apply the exemption when you're selling a product outside of your trust to another trust? That's not a collaboration. That's a commercial activity, isn't it?
The definition talks about organisation, not contract.
Indeed. So and Alison has made this point already, and I want to, because there is a definition of an organisation, of what an organisation is. I'm not a lawyer. Yeah. So I think there's some good points coming out. Thank you.
Ex-lawyer.
Right. So there's a lot of questions around what is a health institution exemption. What is a health institution? So can you apply the exemption or not?
Just another, what about GP practices? Because they're all independent commercial providers. So if they're requesting tests from a secondary care lab, that can't.
So I have seen an example of a laboratory making a product, offering a service to an individual GP, and it's just this one lab, one GP, and they say, and the GP, I think they were under the GMC for some nefarious practice. They were while they were being investigated, they were allowed to continue, and this was described as the health institution exemption because the GP is a health institution.
Can you challenge that?
But the lab,
Yeah.
So it's a health institution's health institution.
Yeah.
But it's supposed to be within institutions.
Yeah, I know.
How is this going to square with the drive for integrated care systems, for integrated accountable care partnerships, whereby you are building conglomerates of trusts, commissioning groups, providers, private providers,
Yep.
GP surgeries.
Yep.
There's
Voluntary
not
sector.
one organisation.
Yep, voluntary sector. And it comes back to the point made at the front here is, I talk about contracts as perhaps being a way through, but actually the lawyers may not allow that. It's about the organisation. But I see collaborations as being enabling innovation. And I see this exemption as enabling innovation. So we need to think about how collaborations work.
Right, don't hold it, but surely there's a governance issue here because therefore you could have all private companies moving into a collaboration with an accredited trust or a body, and then everybody claiming the health exemption.
I mean, we're in danger of running over time, okay? So,
We can capture some of this.
okay.
Yeah, the point I quickly wanted to make was, is the question what is a health institution, or the question be what do you want it to mean?
Well,
What should it mean for this?
it is exactly what it says in the regulations. Yeah. But what?
But given the opportunity for interpretation.
Yeah. Yeah, and then we can present that to the lawyers. And I think as you know, I'll use the B word. You know, and actually, if we get a consensus around what we want in the UK, because this is a national provision, then it doesn't matter about the B word, actually, because we are building something that we all want. We've found a consensus that works for everybody. So what is making or modifying a device? So we talk about making or modifying and using it. Now I'm talking about stuff where if it's in the manufacturer's instructions to say put component A with component B, then you know you're obviously not making anything. You're putting it together according to the instructions. So where it's not explicit in the manufacturer's intended purpose or instructions for use, I'm suggesting it could be any one of those. I'll pick out a couple that I think might be important to look at. So bioinformatics. We have people who develop software within a bioinformatics facility. Are they making or modifying a device? I would say yes. If you're using a product for medical purpose, if it's perhaps marked with the letters R, U and O, or I, U and O, are you using a product for a medical purpose which is not CE marked? Yes, you are. So are you modifying that device? You're giving it a new medical intended purpose. So significant deviations. Now, not minor deviations. Yeah, significant deviations. Something which alters, and our suggestion is something which alters the function or the performance or the purpose of the device would be a significant deviation or a significant modification. Some people might want to add in safety profile into that, if it alters the safety profile. And then how do you demonstrate that it is or is not significant? So these are kind of what I'm thinking might be definitions of making or modifying a device. Transfer of devices. So the regulations are very clear. Devices are not to be transferred to another legal entity. So you cannot make a device and sell it on to another health institution. That's clear. Yeah, that's what the regs say. But we talked about collaborations. What about if you're subcontracting it? If under the CE marking regulation, IVDR, if I'm CE marking it, I can subcontract all of that manufacturing and simply stick my name on it. Well, can I do that as a health institution and say I'm exempt? You know, it's the Steve Lee NHS Trust product, which is made by Munir P. Mohammed Company Limited. Is that okay? How about if I transfer the device from one health institution to another, but that receiving health institution applies the exemption exactly as required. So they fulfill all of the requirements. And they demonstrate that it's safe and fit for purpose. So each trust is taking on its own responsibility, even though the device is the same when it transfers across. I don't think those first two really apply in this room, but clearly if it's an implant or a prosthesis, it's going to be transferred as the patient gets transferred. We're not going to worry about that. Patient samples and patient data, that's not the device. The device is not moving. So if you're moving samples from one health institute to another, or data from one health institute to another, that would not apply because we're not talking about the device. But clearly from the previous part of the conversation, transfer of devices from health institutions outside is quite an issue. So,
are there lots of examples of this, or is it something which we don't have to worry about, or others don't have to worry about?
when we first started to define in-house manufacturing under the IVD directive, we were initially told it doesn't happen very much. But I know Doris Ann has done a lot of work on this one, and it is fairly commonplace, particularly within pathology, and probably within medical physics as well. How much further than that, I don't know. It's probably far more widespread than I have any evidence to suggest.
How long will it take then, if an application isn't, or is the field agreed? I mean, does it take a few days? Does it take a few months? Does it take forever?
So if you're a health institution, you want to apply this exemption. So if you want to apply this exemption, you just apply it. And I think
how long does it take?
well, there is no process at the moment. We're developing this process so that people can apply it.
Expect how long
I would expect simply that the chief executive or whoever simply signs a form to say this is all exempt and we fulfil all the requirements, and that's it. I want to make this as simple and as quick as possible.
So can I interrupt? I think you better get on, Steve.
Yeah.
I think it's cutting into the time for breakout groups, and some of these issues can be taken there.
Thank you.
Is that okay?
So, sorry. The first is the general safety and performance requirements. So every device has to fulfill all of the general safety and performance requirements. Here's a listing of some of them, just the chapter headings. The detail, there's an immense load of detail in the regulations. I'll draw attention to that first one, general requirements, which is apple pie stuff. Intended purpose, intended performance, safe and effective, and risk management. I'd suggest that every device has to have all of those, whether it's exempt or not. And I don't think there's much discussion around that. If you look instead at, say, devices incorporating materials of biological origin, if your device doesn't have materials of biological origin, you don't have to apply that. And you would say, not applicable, see document 9. So there's your checklist sorted. If, for example, you are an electronic program system, you do want to apply those requirements, and you'll just say, there it is, it's in documents 11 to 9, that's that ticked. So that's your checklist. The work behind that is quite a lot of work, I understand, but actually you can just fulfill all of the requirements with a checklist approach. Clinical data, what we were talking about around this morning, we talked about general requirements for all studies and additional requirements for certain studies. If you're exempt, if you're a health institution applying the exemption, how much are you exempt from the requirements for performance studies? If it's a commercial intent, if I'm doing it on behalf of a third party, if Mr. Pharmaceutical comes to me as a health institution and says, can you develop a companion diagnostic? I say, it's okay, I'm a health institution, I'm exempt. Is that okay? No? If I'm going to use it only within my own health institution and it's not on behalf of anybody else, is that okay? Yeah? So I think we have to have a think about how much we apply the requirements for performance evaluation for product development. The justification, everybody has to have a justification for applying the exemption, and it's around patient needs, it's around level of performance, it's around an equivalent device, which is already available on the market. So what is an equivalent device? I think the bar for equivalent device is going to be quite high, so it should be fairly straightforward for people to meet the justification. I've got a list of some things which may be there. Cost isn't written down there. I've been asked about cost effectiveness, been asked about how does it apply within our hospital. So can I if somebody's making a CE-mark device for one particular marker, but it doesn't fit on my system, can I develop it for myself and say there's no equivalent device? Could come under patient needs. If the alternative is taking 10 separate samples from a patient and I only have to take one, that's patient need, isn't it? I apply the exemption, I've got my justification. Do I need to monitor the market to see whether some other test becomes available? And how often do I do that? Do I do that annually? Have I got the resources to do that? Is that fair to ask me to do that? The CE mark often only applies on the day it's written, but we're now asking to look for a life cycle approach. Should we expect that of health institutions as well? Say manufacturer writes to me and says, no, we've got an equivalent device which is CE marked. You need to stop making it. You need to stop using it because your justification is no longer valid. Is that okay? Or does that just allow people to come cherry picking the products which are developed within the health institutions within the NHS? Is that really fair to the NHS? Does it actually encourage innovation? What is an appropriate quality management system? Well, quality management systems are described in a lot of detail in the regulations. We would anticipate that 13485 is likely to be harmonised across to the regulations. Yeah, that's fine. 15189, we are stating, or I am stating in the consultation that 15189 is an appropriate quality management system. Some people argue against that. I'm not arguing against that at the moment. But what if it's sector specific? If it's blood quality, if it's stem cell quality, if it's tissue quality, is that okay? Does that meet the same requirements as set out in the regulations? What about an in-house quality management system? What about 9001? Does anybody think that 9001 is appropriate quality management system for making and using a device? Well, there are people who do think it's appropriate. People who say, that's all I can afford because I'm a small institution. If I can't use 9001, I'm going to have to stop making this device, and these patients' needs will not be met. Publicly available information. I'm splitting it out into 3, and I'm saying I wanted it to be local registration, information made locally available on a website, but a lot of the information I got from stakeholders in developing this was, no, that's not appropriate, you need to do a central registration. Still not decided on that one yet, but if it is a central registration, it'd probably be a bit like our devices registration system. And we have a public access database for Class 1 medical devices. Most people don't know about it, but it is there, and that might be a fairly similar kind of a process that we would take. Governance. Most NHS trusts will have a medical device management committee. It might be called different things in different countries in the UK, but most people will have it. And why not use it? Who's going to make that declaration? If it's a chief executive, they may not have enough information to be able to make that declaration without advice from that management committee. They might not be appropriately qualified, so can they sign it off? Article 15 in the regulations asks for a person responsible for regulatory compliance. It's not equivalent to a QP for medicine, but it's the same kind of concept. It would somebody with a level of qualifications. And I'm being asked as well, should a health institution employ a notified body for their products, which they're calling exempt? Well, the whole concept of the exemption is it doesn't need that notified body conformity assessment. But some people are saying, no, we need that level of reassurance before we think it's okay to let loose on patients. Surveillance and inspection, yellow card, obviously we would expect. There is a requirement to review clinical experience. I imagine in pathology that without an EQA scheme participation, successful participation, you wouldn't be able to review your clinical experience, and you certainly wouldn't get your 15189 accreditation. MHRA may also choose to request information. We may also inspect institutions. That's written into the legislation. How much we're going to do that is not decided. These are the things you might actually be exempt from. You don't need to classify it. You don't need to do those. You may not need to do those additional requirements, that prior authorisation by a member state. You don't need to think about all the requirements for economic operators. You wouldn't necessarily need to take part in UDI, although your trust may require you to do that anyway. You don't need to talk to notified bodies, so there's no requirement there. No conformity assessment, no vigilance reporting or market surveillance. So there are a number of exemptions. It sounds like the requirements are quite stringent, but actually the regulatory requirements, the paperwork, should be a lot less. We have a consultation process running until 2019. It's a very long, slow, deliberately slow consultation process. It's attracted a lot of criticism, but actually I still think it's the right thing to do, because what I would love to see is health institutions saying, I've tried this for this product, I've tried this for this process, I've tried this element of it, and it works or it doesn't work. It's brilliant, we love it, Steve's done exactly the right thing, or get rid of that bloke, he's useless because this process is rubbish. I don't mind which, I would like to get that feedback from people using it. It doesn't apply to medicinal products, we're absolutely clear on that. This is only about medical devices and IVDs. And there is going to have to be some form filling. 2020 for medical devices, 2022 for IVDs. Doesn't sound like a long time, does it? Especially if you're only just starting to think about it. So time for the health institutions to get their act together now. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.